Hey guys, Matthew here, and in today's video we're going to be going over the patch notes for the upcoming 3.16 Scourge League. Now, if I was to just sit here and read all of these 16,000 words or whatever, it would probably take a few hours, and realistically you could do that on your own. So what I've done is I've prepared basically all of the key points, right? All of the important stuff that you will find in these patch notes, so there's still a decent amount of things to talk about, but it's going to be significantly shorter. Now, before I go and I get right into it, there's a few things I need to talk about. One thing that you will not see me talking about, like pretty much at all, is anything in regards to ascendancies or passive tree changes or build viability, right? Now, this is a question that I had almost, it was by far the most asked question today during my stream was, is this build alive? Is that build alive? Is this build alive? The thing is, I don't know. Now, we are fortunate enough that GGG dropped patch notes on us a whole week prior to the league even starting, which is about 4 more days than we typically get to actually prepare our builds, which is massive. Not only that, the information is all out, so Path of Building can get updated so where we can actually start to POB our builds and see what's alive and what isn't. So, before you ask me if this build or that build is alive, just give me some time. I've prepared 4 different league starters this league, 2 miners, a trapper, as well as a Berserker, which is a General Cry Blade Flurry character. Could also be played as Shield Crush if you felt like it. So 4 different builds that I have for you guys, but until POB is updated and I can start, fixing up the defenses and all that, I really don't have that answer, okay? So I want to push out those builds just as much as you guys want to start getting into your practice and into your planning, but POB is necessary. All right, now that I've gone over that, let's get over and get into the patch notes. So again, first things first, Scourge League. A TLDR on the Scourge League is very simple. You kill monsters in your regular areas to fill up some blood in your vessel thingy. You activate the Scourge, and then the amount of blood that you have is going to decrease as time goes on, and you have to kill as many monsters as possible before you run out of blood. When you run out of blood, or when you, I think you can also just like go back to your regular map, it's going to finish. And then if you have killed enough monsters to where your item that's in the Scourge thingy is ready to be scourged, then you're going to be able to go ahead and do that and corrupt it and change it, whatever, to have all the outcomes that it can have. All rare items pretty much can have 3 tries on the rare item. So if you get something that bricks your item to make it completely unusable, you can try again up to 3 times on regular items, 10 times on maps, and they do stack, or at least they have the capability of stacking, the opportunity to do so. And you can also scourge uniques, which is going to be absolutely insane, given that you have the currency to do so, because of course you can brick those uniques completely in after a given amount of tries. The thing to note is that the more tries you do on these items, the stronger they get, the stronger the modifiers that you get become, which means that there is pretty much infinite potential here for items that are going to be truly outrageous, which is really cool because it gives you something to look forward to, and it gives you a reason to grind the game out. All right, removal of Perandus. Everything that is basically Perandus is now going to become Expedition. So Delirium Orbs, Scarabs, everything like that. Anything that had Perandus in it is now being converted to Expedition, because Expedition did go core this league, which is pretty neat because I think a lot of people liked it after the changes. Initially, at the very beginning of the league, it was pretty awful, but they changed it and it became quite decent. I think most people really liked it. They liked the whole gambling aspect. There's a lot of things you could do, so I think it makes sense that they went core with it. Okay, from the Scourge, you are going to get Tainted Currencies. So pretty much all of the currencies, or almost all of the currencies that you have right now, that you know of, things like fusings, things like divines, whatever, right, are all going to have a tainted version of them, at least from my understanding, which is going to be applied to corrupted items instead. So this is really cool because it opens up some really endgame crafting options and some really endgame options in terms of getting corrupted items, which is something that's never really been possible, because when you corrupt an item, you can't really do anything to it. Sure, you can change the socket via the bench and the colors and all that, but you've never been able to really add anything to it. Now, one thing that we don't know about is, are we going to have Tainted Exalted Orbs? That would be really, really sick, but I don't know. Are we going to have Tainted Mirrors to where you are going to be able to mirror a corrupted item? Now, that would be absolutely insane. I think those could go for thousands of exalts without, like, no kidding. Of course, that's just me, probably my delusions, but that would be pretty cool. Otherwise, though, for the most of it is going to be some pretty baseline currencies like fusings and jewelers and stuff. But it's still pretty cool, as it's going to allow you to, fix your items as they are corrupted, since the Scourge is going to corrupt your items, right? So without these currencies, it would be really annoying because you pretty much wouldn't want to interact with the League mechanic, because the only option would be to use the bench, which is typically very expensive as it requires the same amount of Val Orbs than the baseline currency. Okay, Tainted Blessings. Now, these are absolutely fantastic. They allow you to enchant an item which is corrupted. So this, again, is a really, really big endgame chase. So let's just say that you have a helmet, right? A unique helmet. Like in the trailer, they actually used a Crown of the Inward Eye, which is a drop from Cyrus, and then you corrupt it with +1 power charge. Now, +1 power charge adds a tremendous amount of value to a build which cares for it, sometimes upwards of 10% plus damage. But then you don't really want to give up your helmet enchant for that +1 power charge in most cases, because that's also going to be a fairly similar amount of damage or quality of life or mana or whatever it is, right? So you don't want to do that. Now you'll be able to get both, because these Tainted Blessings are going to allow you to take these really juicy corruptions and enchant them after the fact. That right there is really cool, because it means that instead of enchanting an item beforehand and then corrupting it to see if you get something good on the corruption, you'll be able to corrupt them first, and if you get a juicy corruption, then go through and enchant it or pay for an enchantment service, stuff like that. Really cool. I'm super, super hyped for these Tainted Blessings. Stackable Currencies. Less clicking, less wasting time, more rewarding gameplay. Essentially, you're going to drop currency less often, but when it does drop, it's going to drop in bigger stacks. Now, this is something that they said they are going to be testing, basically. So it's going to be our first real test league for this mechanic. And this is going to apply to basically everything, not just like your regular, the regular things like, for example, Delirium dropping, Simulacrums in big stacks. It's going to be pretty much all and everything across the game. Everything is going to start dropping more in stacks, which is really, really cool, because, people have known to have like wrist issues and stuff like that from this game, from all of the clicking. Not to mention, it's a huge waste of time to press, 40 different Scrolls of Wisdom. Now, if it drops in packs with, let's say, 10, it's only 4 clicks instead of 40 clicks. It's massive. All right, stackable fragment items such as boss fragments and scarabs. This is something that we saw in the teasers that I mentioned in yesterday's video. But still, this is really, really cool. It's nice quality of life. It means that for people who didn't like, juicing their maps and just running Alkengo maps because they didn't like having to, constantly buy all these fragments and stuff. And if they didn't have the pay-to-win tabs, they weren't able to really keep track of all these things easily. Now, stackable, which means very, very easy to use. So that's really cool, because it means that even the more casual players now can start to, interact more with the end game of juicing their maps and not going with the usual Alkengo strategies. Expedition Ghost Core, as I've previously mentioned. Artifacts, however, are not going to be tradable, so that means that you'll have to use your own artifacts, but coinage will be tradable. So that means that, even if these artifacts are not tradable, and if you just don't want to interact with them, you can just sell the coinages to other people who will want to use their artifacts. Or the same case applies if you farm it a bunch and you have a ton of artifacts but no coinages, you'll be able to buy the coinages from other people. Now, prices are going to be determined by supply and demand, but that's pretty interesting. I like that, because the reason right now is that people are farming expeditions and logbooks to get artifacts, but they were selling the artifacts instead of interacting with the league mechanic. So this is more engaging gameplay, if you will. Now, one thing which is really cool is because it's not tradable, GGG doesn't consider it an item that has value, therefore they are going to be auto pickup. Now, this is a huge deal for quality of life, again, and saving you some clicks. All right, good changes to guilds are also coming. Guild Stash gets a premium tab, and you can shift-click things into it. Now, this is huge quality of life. You used to not be able to shift-click things in and out of guild stashes, it is basically the reason why most people just didn't use guild stashes. Now this is going to be very, very nice. There's also going to be a guild hideout which can be shared between all of the members for up to 20 people per instance or something, 25 people per instance, which that's a really cool change because, you know, even if realistically you'll probably be in your own hideout doing your own maps and stuff, it's really cool if you have, you know, a smaller guild and you all want to have the same hideout and chill together or do guild meetings. I don't know. It's just nice. And, you know, the fact that it's possible now is pretty cool. Now, Favour is going away from the game. So Favour, which is something you get from completing master missions, is going away. Anyone will therefore be able to make insane hideout with infinite stuff, right? You won't have to purchase any decorations with Fervor. Not only that, every single decoration, because it's now free and unlimited, will be available outside of course, the ones that are, you know, pay to win, the ones that you have to pay as MTXs. But that still means that for the people who enjoy, you know, making their own hideouts, you will no longer have to farm millions and millions of Favour in order to make the sickest hideout that you can have and that you can possibly imagine. So that's a nice little change. I mean, Favour was an outdated system anyways. All right, Uber Endgame, aspirational content, a lot of it. Uber Blights can be anointed up to 9 times, but only 3 times with the same oil. So you're not going to be able to do like 9 times the same oil, but you'll be able to do 3 times 3 different oils. So that's pretty nice because you'll be able to do like some oils in regards to maximizing the value, but maybe also decreasing the amount of time it takes you to do for like teal oils. And also, you know, maybe making the map easier with something like the orange oil, which amber oil, I think makes the towers have more range or something like that. Can't quite remember. But you'll be able to do that. So you'll be able to mix and match. If your character is capable of just doing it completely maxed out, you can use 9 oils that are all going to give you more rewards, but you can also go with some more quality of life or things that are going to allow you to run these Uber Blight maps, these Ravaged Blight maps, especially because we don't know just how, you know, rewarding they're going to be. All right, Uber Emblems, we have very little information about that. All we know is that every time that you reset it in the middle, the map is going to get harder. Significantly harder, especially due to things like penetration. I think it's like 9% elemental penetration per reset, which is going to become extremely difficult to survive extremely quickly. However, I guess if this is not a maximum, right, if it's just a baseline 9% resistance, and then you can get, you know, more and more and more resistances via headhunter stacks and stuff like that, it might be kind of fine, but because it's penetration, I have a feeling that it's going to go right through your resistances. And that means that these are going to be really hard and we don't really know anything about the rewards, so this needs to be tested. We're also getting Uber Breachstones, which will now drop the new GG amulet. I'll be showcasing that at the end of the video, but there's a really cool amulet that is going to be dropping from there. Now, monsters are also going to be more rewarding. They're going to have like regular mods from, regular rewards that are going to be paired with mods that you would get on regular maps, like for example, attacking gas speed, stuff like that, which means Blights are going to be, Breachstones are going to be on average harder, but much, much more rewarding. All the loot is also going to drop at the end. That's a huge quality of life because you won't have to worry about stopping to pick up items as you're clearing the breach. You're going to be able to focus on just clearing it as fast as possible and, you know, staying as safe as possible without having to worry about any sort of loot. And at the very end, you'll get a loot explosion of all the goodies. So that's awesome. Simulacrum will now have 30 waves. Now, this might affect the price of Simulacrum negatively because it means that people are going to need less Simulacrums in the same amount of time. And Simulacrums are already very time consuming. Now they're going to be way more time consuming because they're 50% longer. Now, that being said, you can have multiple bosses post Wave 20. Before, it was one of each boss's maximum by the end of Wave 20, but you could get them much earlier as well. What that means is that there's going to be multiple uniques possible to drop, so things like voices, things like split personalities, you know, all that good stuff is now going to be possible to drop multiple times in each of these simulacrums. That being said, the waves 20 to 30 are going to be significantly harder than wave 20, and wave 20 is already known to be pretty hard. So the builds that are capable of doing wave 30 are probably going to be, you know, very few, but if you're capable of making a build that can do it, you're probably going to be rewarded pretty heavily. Not to mention that before you had clusters only really drop at wave 20. Now every single wave past wave 20 is also going to drop cluster jewels and increasingly more cluster jewels. So this running Simulacrums from Wraith 20 to 30 might actually become the #1 way of farming cluster jewels, or at least bases cluster jewels, which is pretty pog. All right, Atlas has been cut in half. We're going to 4 regions and just about 100 maps outside of the unique maps. So that's really cool because it means that you're going to be able to progress through the storyline much faster. You're going to be able to get to Cyrus much faster. So for the people who don't have as much time to play, this is a huge quality of life buff. And just overall, it makes the game way less tedious because people know that you really start to make currency and progress your character and all that after you get to Cyrus. And once you start farming the end game content, pairing, for example, Xana mods, with Atlas mods and stuff like that, with Watchstone mods and all that stuff just pairs all together, and you end up, with strategies that make a lot of currency so that you can farm for endgame items and upgrades and XP and all that. But that doesn't really start until you get to that point. So by cutting that in half, it means that people who don't get to play as much are going to be able to actually interact with that content in that, end game, which is awesome. Atlas passives have been barely modified, but some have been, but they've been condensed. So you're not actually going to be losing any passives for the most part. However, I'll be making a video about that, where to farm and all that. As you can see, I have the whole list of the passives and where they are ready to go. So I'm going to be pairing that with the best Xana mods and where I think you guys should spend your time in order to make currency from, entry-level Alchemy strategies to much more endgame stuff. All right, Delve progression is now about 4 times faster past, I think it's depth 500, but also 4 times more difficult. And the scaling is infinite. So what that means is it doesn't stop at 6,000. That being said, there's also no more free delving. So the way that it worked before is that once you got to depth 6,000, which to be fair was a pretty deep depth, and for anybody who wasn't just dedicating their life to delving, you would never get there, right, as a casual player and all that. Now it's going to be 4 times easier to get there. Now it doesn't mean that your build is going to be able to be 4 times worse, right? It's still going to be just as hard on your build and all that, but it's going to be much less time consuming. The disadvantage here is that before, once you got to 6K, you would reach what is called like the Delve Paradise, which is where you would reach that and all the modifiers on each of the biomes would just go away. So you were free delving because it was way easier. There's no turbo, there's no sort of anything slowing you, there was nothing, reflecting, like anything like that. Now, this is no longer going to be the case. These modifiers are always going to be there, so there's going to be no such thing as free delving anymore. Bosses are always going to have mods, which means in average they're going to be harder, especially early, but they're going to be much more common. So if you've never found All in your entire PoE career, now is going to be the time. By the way, All is probably the best fight in the entire game, and I'm somebody who's killed, hundreds and hundreds of bosses and encounters. And I have to say that All is my favorite by far, as it is completely and entirely only about knowing the mechanics and knowing what's coming and how to avoid it and, how to kill him. It's a really cool fight. Not to mention that it's actually really good for currency, as it drops, All's amulets, and some of them can be worth quite a bit, especially now, I think, with the changes to mana reservation efficiency. Those might be absolutely huge. All right, fossils are now obtained mostly from delving. They've been nerfed in other places, but they've been buffed and delved significantly. That means that darkness farming might be big money, right? Making a character that is very quick and then just foregoing soul fight entirely and just running for broken walls might be a very good way to make currency, which is called flare running, basically, where you just run around and throw flares and break down walls and get the rewards. That might be pretty good. Because they're also removing the alchemical resonators. All 4, be it 1 socket to 4 socket, all are going away. They're only keeping the chaotic resonators, which is nice because it means that on average you are not going to need those scours anymore. However, typically it was actually more worth it to use the alchemical and the scours than to purchase the chaotic, but it does mean that, it's a little bit easier now. You don't have to make that choice, and you have to, go through the trouble of buying hundreds and hundreds of scouring whenever you're doing a project, which requires lots of fossils. No more enchanted fossils. Now, that's not a big deal because of the changes to lab. Enchants have devalued tremendously. Now they're really cheap, even for the best ones in the game. You had the top-end enchants prior to 3.15 at somewhere like 40 exalts, and now the most expensive are 5 and sometimes just slightly higher than that, maybe up to 10 exalts for the best in the game. So lab running is already in a very good spot because, of course, you're getting way more of these enchants anyways. But for the people buying these helmets and these enchants, it's a lot cheaper, which is nice. Now we also get critical and attributes modifiers on fossils. That's a huge change. That means that if you've ever wanted to craft something that had attributes or critical on it, you're going to be able to do that via fossils. Uber Lab no longer requires trials, something I mentioned in my video yesterday. That's a nice little quality of life. It makes, getting to lab that much easier, especially for solo self-found. It's much easier to get Ailment Immune via Flask, but overall affixes on gear as well, especially even simple bench mods. They've been buffed quite a bit. Now, this is something that we already spoke about in the manifesto. Same thing with the Flask, so I kind of went over it really quickly, but Flasks are getting buffed. Enkindling Orbs are getting buffed big time, and Duration is also getting buffed over like all of the utility Flasks. Flask, however, will get an item level requirement for the highest mod tiers, which means that picking up Flask late game in higher tier maps, T14, 15, 16, might actually be money. Like, Flask is something that's not on anybody's filter after you get to like yellow maps. Now they might actually stay because those these high item level Flasks might actually have some value. Ailments and Currencies immunity via Flask pianoing is basically back as well. They've kind of reverted that nerf to where you couldn't, pre-Flask in order to get the immunity. Now that's coming back. And the Enkindling Orbs buff is actually pretty insane with the new belt that I'll mention at the end of the video, as well as the amulet that I was talking about. Armour and Evasion are now some of the more primary defensive mechanics for people at the bottom and on the right side of the tree that are not doing any sort of block or ES mechanics. Now, this is, again, something we've spoken about with the manifestos already. It does make balancing much easier, so from a development standpoint, it's actually a good change. That being said, we need POB to push build guides, as I've previously mentioned at the beginning of the video. ES got overall buffed via faster start, nodes on the tree, increased recovery, etc. Orbots got severely nerfed, but are probably still going to be viable. They're not as dead as people think. Probably you're going to grant somewhere around 3 to 4 times more damage on a budget instead of granting 6 times and above, upwards of like 10 times more damage, which means overall they're still going to be worth using even as a duo. You're going to get more damage than if you just had 2 people doing 100% damage each, but it's going to be more in line with that so that you don't get this massive damage and survivability buff that you can trivialize all the content with, barely any currency invested in your gear. Curse bots also got nerfed, and clusters got nerfed for both aura and cluster characters. We're basically going from mediums to smalls, and that's a massive change, but that's already been mentioned in the manifesto video before. Dot builds seem to have been buffed, but instead, I kind of had forgotten that they lost EE and EO, which means overall it's probably like a net loss in DPS until late game because there's some affixes to make up for that. And because you're dropping EE in most cases, it means that you'll be able to scale off of flat damage, right? Which means flat damage and paired with the affixes on gear that goes much higher now for damage over time means that I think that overall at the beginning of the game, in the early stages of your damage over time build, you'll feel weaker. But at the very end game, once you start getting, much better gear and stuff, it's actually going to be a lot better. I'm not talking about any sort of skill tree or ascendancy changes. I'll cover that in future build guides, as I previously mentioned. Awakened support gems got a massive buff pretty much across the board. Anywhere between 5 to 20% more damage. Or sorry, it's actually 10%. 10% more damage for most builds, and that is per woke gem. So if you use, for example, 2 or 3 of these that got buffed, and 2 of them were 10% because they're giving you additional gem levels, and one of them is a 5% because the base value got increased by 5%, you're looking at 25% more damage on your build. This is actually insane, and it by far makes up for the nerf that they did to, well, Awakened Gems last league, which was obviously not something that was desirable by any means. However, these buffs are mostly affecting level 5 gems, which means that it's going to reward people who have, high level Awakened Gems, which does take a while to level. Much longer than, for example, an Enlightener even, or an Empower. So that means that farming Cyrus might be big money because these gems are going to be very desirable for people trying to get as much damage as possible on their builds. Alright, big meta skills. Basically, Spectral Shield Throw and Forbidden Rite Totems were nerfed. They were absolutely not buffed. They were both nerfed pretty heavily, I would say, but they might still be good. Again, I need to see the POBs before I make up my mind on that, but it does seem like they were pretty heavily nerfed from the look of things, which makes sense because, you know, GGG don't want people playing the same exact build every single league over and over. So it does make sense to nerf them so people, you know, meta shift and play something else. All right, Skin of the Lords now gives +2 socketed gems, so this is probably going to be the go-to endgame option for miners, including my build, especially with a good keystone. However, if you don't get a good keystone, and that's where it might get expensive, what could be just as good, at least in terms of outright DPS and survivability, is going to be a well-corrupted Skin of the Loyal, because it gives you +1 gem instead of +2, but it does have the 100% increased global defense, and this is kind of what we're after. The reason why we use Skin of the Loyal or Skin of the Lords is because it replaces Tabula for a very easy and cheap 6-link, if, you know, given the right colors. But not only that, this 100% increased global defense is going to be great at scaling our evasion, especially with the way that I think we're going to have to build the characters by getting grace and stuff like that. All right, normal Atziri got buffed and now is going to be dropping Disfavor, which is something that dropped from Uber Atziri before. So it might actually be a viable strategy to farm normal Atziri early, as she now has a drop that is worthwhile. That being said, this is a strategy that is going to stick around for a very short amount of time, because Disfavor loses its value tremendously fast, especially due to the fact that there are some divination cards for it. Like the last one standing, if I remember correctly, which goes for, you know, barely anything because it's super common. Okay, Uber Atziri, to make up for that, now drops Pledge of Hand, and they've also buffed Acuity. It's only a small buff. It's like 20% increased crit or something, which is like not that big of a deal. But overall, it's nice to have buffs to Uber Atziri, especially the Pledge of Hands. Now, Pledge of Hands is really only good when Archmage meta is at its peak, which is currently not the case at all. But that being said, it's always still a pretty expensive item, especially early game, because a lot of people plan for it in their starter builds. So it's pretty cool because it means that Uber Atziri, on average, is probably going to be just more worthwhile to actually farm. And she's going to stay, you know, more relevant for a longer period of time outside of just being a part of farming the Feared. All right, mines are now going to be immune to all damage for 2 seconds on base. This is going to make leveling just overall smoother because monsters are not going to be able to instantly delete your mines or break your mines. And this is actually also a viable option for even endgame, because this 2 seconds, if you don't care about sequencing, meaning you never have to worry about having, you know, all your mines on the ground as all at the same time. That means that you'll be able to outright skip the miner cluster, which is on the left-hand side of the tree where Acro and Phase Acro was. You'll be able to skip, or sorry, the right side of the tree. You'll be able to skip all of that and focus on going to, say, for example, Templar for maybe block. This is a change that I'll need to POB to make sure that it's something that's actually viable. But it's a pretty interesting mechanic, because this change here, just making mines immune for 2 seconds, honestly, can have some very big impacts on the endgame. Unwavering focus nerf. Basically, this seems to be a target nerf at Palstrom's builds. So if you've seen it on YouTube, it's a very, very fast, like something like 500% move speed Cyclone build. It does seem to be in shambles now because this Unwavering focus, I think, was a bug. But essentially, the reduced cost was actually applying to the Rage, I believe. So you could get basically permanent Rage, which will allow you to get ridiculous move speed. Well, that seems to be going away. Which, again, it makes sense if it wasn't intended. And, you know, having a build that has permanent 500% move speed and good clear speed and good damage for relatively, you know, decent amount of currency is potentially too strong. Or at least according to GGG, it was. Most crafts are now available in maps. This is a huge quality of life change for basically everyone, because you don't need to pay, you know, stupid fees on crafts. Tree of Dead is probably in shambles on that one. But that is a huge change that I personally really like. For example, going in Delve to get your socket recipe and color recipe was always super annoying to me. Well, now I'll be able to get those, you know, in maps. Same things for the ones that were stuck in, for example, the ones that were stuck from Given Prophecies, or the crafts that were stuck in the Temple of Atzawadal. Most of those are now all just going to be available in maps, which I really like. Unveil modifiers now takes a single unveil to get all of the tiers. Now, this is a massive, massive quality of life change and overall an SSF huge buff. Now, you used to see these on Reddit all the time, people being like, hey, I got 40 challenges. I got, 40 out of 40 challenges. I play SSF and look at my unveils, and they'd be missing a ton of them, right? Or at least especially the higher tiers. Now, this is no longer going to be a problem. You find an item, you get to unveil the tier, whatever it is that you want, a single time, and all of the tiers are unlocked. This is really, really cool. One of the changes that I'm absolutely loving. All right, Sacred Blossom is now going to drop the equivalent of Replica Forbidden Shaco, because Replica Forbidden Shaco is being removed from Heist, and Forbidden Shaco, which is a trash tier item, is basically getting changed to Replica Forbidden Shaco in terms of values, and that is absolutely insane. It means right now a Replica Forbidden Shaco is something like 300 exalts in Expedition, and at its cheapest it was at least like 100 exalts. So now this is probably going to devalue Replica Forbidden Shaco, but that doesn't even matter. Because even if it was like 20 or 30x, it's still a very, very sick drop. And if it drops from Sacred Blossoms, you can actually target farm Sacred Blossoms in, for example, Lex Proxima. Now, I don't know if Lex Proxima is going to still have the node for Sacred Blossoms, and I don't know if that node is even going to be on the tree. I haven't really looked yet, but overall, it's going to be possible to target farm Sacred Blossoms via farming harvests, and therefore you're going to be able to get those and get, fight the boss, and then, have a chance at Replica Forbidden Shaco, which is one of the most expensive item in the game right now, outside of perfect, crafted mirror tier items. So that's a crazy change. That's a ridiculously insane change. All right, Harvest Reforges are now going to apply to all rarities, so you no longer need to carry Scours. Now, this is also a quality of life change. It seems that GG is just going all out on quality of life. I'm super happy about that. There was these crafts that were reforge a normal item into a rare, or reforge your magic into a rare. Now, these are going to all be able to use on all rarities. So, magic, rare, or even just normal, they're all going to share the same pool, which means that overall, if you're not somebody who is carrying a ton of scourings all over the place, or if you couldn't use a specific craft because, let's say, you're trying to roll a magic item because it was, let's just say, an item that you had imprinted with like prefixes or suffixes cannot be changed in a single affix. Now, every single time you get those, you'll be able to use the craft once at a time instead of having to scour it every single time. That's just another big quality of life change. Also, whenever you drop maps that are going to be blue, which is pretty common, especially annoying in the early stage of the league when you don't have a whole lot of currency, you'll be able to use these crafts to regal your maps for free, if you will, because you can turn a magic into a rare, which is something that people already did, rerolling their maps using Harvest, or alching their map using Harvest. But now it's also going to be applicable to regaling, which is the blue maps, which are the annoying ones that nobody wants to buy from you. So that's a nice change. Synthesis maps are getting more value from synth modifiers, so more quantity, more pack size, and all that. So essentially, the amount of quantity and rarity and pack size that you would normally get from a regular modifier is going to be applied to synth modifiers. It's not a massive deal, but it's a nice little change. It does mean that running synthesized unique maps is going to be more valuable and more worth your time. Overall, just more rewarding. Trigger marks no longer cost mana over time, only when the mark isn't applied. So this is really nice for mana sustain, because let's say you have a Assassin's Mark on hit ring right now, and you hit an enemy, you're going to apply the mark to it. If you hit the same enemy again and again and again, every time you hit them, you're going to reapply the curse, but that's also going to recost you that mana, right? Which is really bad for mana sustain. Now this is going to help a lot. One massive change is that ESO, which is Syndicate Operative Spectres, are completely dead. You can ask Yazzie about that. I think he's still crying on stream right now because they completely killed this build. All right, Xanamods are amazing. Mentioned in the previous video, and I'll have a subsequent video pairing Xanamods with Atlas Regions, as I've mentioned previously. So that's going to be coming along very, very soon, probably tomorrow. Insane chase uniques this league. We already looked at the amulet that's going to be coming from Blight Ravaged maps, but that's not it. There's also a crazy belt that I'll showcase in a second, as well as a new amulet. So let's look at these real quick. The amulet, which is Olnethal's Vow, does not drop only from Olnethal's, but it does drop only from the new Uber Breachstones. You'll be able to get it from any of the Breach Lords, however. And what it does is that it has a socket, and in this socket you could put a support gem. And socketed non-exceptional support gems can also be supported, can also support skills from your body armor. Now, I'm not sure exactly what exceptional support means. It probably means something like awakened or alternate quality. I don't know. But essentially, it means that you can turn your 6-link armor into a 7-link. And for most build, that's like 30% more damage just right there. Or like 20% more damage and a bunch of quality of life functions or whatever. Right? This is really, really cool. Not only that, it also comes with quad resistances. Now, these resistance in the trailer were negative, and now they are positive, so that tells me that this range of resistances is probably massive, which means that to get a really good one of these, you're probably going to have to spend a fair few amount of divines, but that shouldn't matter because it's a really, really cool amulet. That being said, it's not going to beat, say, perfect amulets, but the resistances alongside this extra support gem are very, very good. Now, the one massive, massive item, this is going to be one of the best in slot for basically every single bossing build ever, is this. So, Mage Blood, not only does it give you strength because it's a heavy belt, a bunch of dexterity, which is going to be useful for builds that typically want to use this, and a bunch of resistances. It gives you magic utility flask cannot be used, and then it gives you leftmost 4 magic utility flasks constantly apply their flask effects to you. So left 4 most magic utility flask means that essentially 4 out of your 5 flask, and obviously they're keeping one of them for your life flask, which is why they're keeping it like that, right? Are always activated, right? They constantly apply to you, but you can't use them because they're always on, and magic utility flask cannot be removed. Now, this doesn't sound like it would necessarily be that insane, but you pair that with Enkindling Orbs, and you can get some ridiculous amounts of juice on your build, especially when it comes to bossing characters who struggle at having permanent flash charges. But not even that, even just for mapping, you can have basically a permanent, flask of adrenaline on top of a permanent, say, defensive flask and another offensive flask. Now, the thing is, this only applies to magic utility flask, which means, say you want to run Bottled Faith or something like that, you won't be able to. But this by far outweighs a Bottled Faith. And when I say by far, I mean by far, especially paired with Enkindling Orbs. You could have an Enkindling Orb 70% increased, crit chance flask, right? A diamond flask as well as a sulfur flask. There's a lot of both offensive and defensive options, even resistance options like an amethyst flask for, chaos resistance. There's just so much going on here. This unique is absolutely awesome. So, that pretty much concludes my TLDR of the patch notes. Now, I know that it wasn't, that short of a video, but there was a lot to go through. That was still, I think fairly short compared to everything that's actually mentioned in this. Again, anybody, wondering about my league starters and whether they're alive or not, I need to wait until I get POB to update, and then I will be making my build guides for the ones that are still alive. And the ones that are not, I'll be dropping and letting you know that they are completely dead due to the changes, especially when it comes to defense. So that'll be it for this video. Before I go, however, I want to say huge thank you to all my supporters. Kat, Alex, Brandon, Nate, the second Alex, Flame Scorpion, Neroth, Grimoire, The Great Master, Johnny, Thomas Mass, Reese, Tim, Axel, Road to Millions, Adicus, Scott, Stan Zarashi, Welcome Back, and Wolverine, as well as Ronald, Kevin, the third Alex, Bitizen, and Mercury. And of course, anybody else who's supported me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Hopefully this video was helpful in understanding some of the changes. And that'll be Matthew signing out until the next one. Peace.